The city of Rome itself has two names. It has been called the Eternal City. It has also been called the City on Seven Hills. Rome is actually founded on seven hills, and these hills still exist to this day. I mean, granted, today a lot of Rome is ruins, a lot of it is ancient, but you still have the seven hills. Rome is located on the Tiber River. Don't worry about the name Tiber so much, but what is significant is that it's located 50 miles from the shoreline. Well, why 50 miles from the coastline? I mean, a lot of cities located on the coastline. Well, it's believed that tidal waves were a big problem, and the Romans wanted to locate themselves a long way from the ocean, or 50 miles, where they would not be bothered by tidal waves. No tidal wave would ever come in that far. And also protect them from pirates. Pirates in the Mediterranean were a big problem in the ancient world. Eventually the Romans came in with their navy and cleared the navy out of pirates, but pirates used to be a big issue. Well, no pirate were going to go 50 miles up the river, because once he got far out from the sea, if a big enough army and navy came in and blocked off the river, the pirates were trapped. And pirates, they only prey on people they think they can win. Basically, I mean, underneath are cowardly people. They only take on the group of people they think are helpless and can't fight them. Get a big ship after them or a big navy, and they'll run as fast as they can. So the idea was to keep away from pirates. So Rome was located, also was located, in addition to being located, it was located near the middle of the Italian peninsula. Now, granted, it was not in the center of the Italian peninsula, but along near the coast, but at the same time near the middle, which wound up making it easier for Rome to rule over the peninsula of Italy. Now, the peninsula of Italy, unlike the Greek peninsula, the mountains are not as rugged and not as steep. There are mountains, but they're not that tall. The land is better suited for farming, and it made it easier for the peninsula to be united. Much easier than it was for the Greeks to unite theirs. Again, you do have mountains there, but they do not divide the peninsula into small isolated communities. Now, according to legend, there were two twin boys who were abandoned by their mother, they both had the same mother, they were twins. Their parents abandoned them, some wolves found them, and wolves bought them up. Nearby here is a city in Georgia called Rome. If you visit Rome, you'll see a picture of two young boys nursing from a she-wolf. Have any of you seen the statue? A couple of you have, yeah. There's a statue there in the city of Rome. It is known, folk, that wolves have on occasion. In American folklore, Pecos Bill fell out of the wagon when his parents were moving, fell out of the wagon, and some wolves found him. He grew up among the wolves. There have been 50-some documented cases of young people, babies, who were reared up by wolves. And it is known that when these people are eventually found by humans and adopted by humans, that they don't seem to be any worse off after you spent time with the wolves. Anyway, Romulus and Remus, according to folklore, grew up with the wolves. And Romulus eventually killed Remus, and therefore the city of Rome is named after Romulus. The traditional date for the founding of Rome was 753 BCE. Again, there's no real way to verify this. All we have in the way of written sources was the Romans always believed that they were founded in 753 BCE by Romulus. They also claimed that there were 7 kings. 7 kings who ruled Rome, and the last 3 were Etruscan. Now, for a long time, we took these stories as serious history, because Rome had a few historians who wrote about their history, and some of the writings came down to us. But in the 1700s, a historian named Gibbon said, you know, I don't believe any of those 7 kings existed. And for a while then their existence was questioned because we didn't have any original sources. Today we know at least that the last 3 of them, the Etruscan kings, did in fact exist. Well, actually, as your book says, that Rome did fall under the influence of the Etruscans for a time. In other words, who were the Etruscans? Well, they were an Indo-European people like the Romans who built up an empire that lasted a while and then faded. But for a while, they even ruled over Rome. Again, these mystery peoples, sometimes we wish we knew more about. We simply can't tell much about them. What we do know about the Etruscans are they set up a big building program. They constructed the first roads that we had in Rome. The main one, the chief street called the Sacred Way, they built that. Now, the Roman roads were better than any roads that we find elsewhere in the ancient world, in that they were laid down with a foundation, a solid foundation. Then on top of the solid foundation, they would lay a block. And this meant that they could carry heavier loads because they could carry carts. And the horse, even one horse could pull a fairly heavy load by means of a cart because the horse was pulling this cart on a solid rock road rather than on a dirt and mud road. So their roads enabled them to have an excellent trade, also enabled them to move the armies around and the armies could carry a lot of heavy equipment. Again, the good roads, and eventually, I will talk about it, there's an old saying that all roads lead to Rome. That eventually became the case. Now, somewhere along the way, as was the case in so many Greek city-states, the Romans decided they did not like to be ruled by hereditary monarchs. So they got rid of their last of their kings and developed a republic. Which is what Plato might have found ideal, but again, it was a progression here. Now, folks, a republic is very similar to democracy, except in a republic, only representatives do the governing. The ordinary person does not have a whole lot of say-so, but governing is done by representatives. I must mention too here that the Romans spoke a language called Latin. The Latin language was to be spoken by the Romans up until the time of the fall of the Roman Empire, when it largely died. That's why the people who speak it are sometimes called Latins. Well, Rome eventually engaged in wars with its neighbors, and as they would engage in a war and defeat their neighbor, they would approach their neighbors and say, hey, be our ally. We'll build a road from our city to yours. We'll trade with you. The trade will increase the wealth of both our cities. Then in turn, if you're invaded, we'll come to your aid, and if we're invaded, you can come to our aid. Your sons can marry our daughters, and our daughters will be welcome to marry your sons. Come and join us. So the Romans would build a road to each of their conquered cities. They'd use themselves, their conquered city, to go out and conquer another city, and then conquer another city, and each time build a road to that city, which is why the saying came about, all roads lead to Rome. And eventually, they built up to where they had conquered all of Italy, and they ruled Italy. Now, it's been said that the Romans never planned to conquer the world. The world more or less just fell on their lap. They had just intended to live peacefully as they could in a almost, well, not quite the middle of the Mediterranean, but there in the middle of the peninsula. and never had any aspirations or thoughts about conquering anyone outside. But they thought, hey, once we've gotten control of all of Italy, we'll all live in peace and harmony. There were other people, though, outside who had other ideas. Now, your book talks about the Roman state. You had the consuls, the praetors, and the Senate. Now, folks, the United States patterned a lot of its government after the Roman Republic. The United States has a body in Washington we call a Senate. And just about every state capital in our nation, with maybe a few exceptions, but has a Senate. Consuls, in other words, there was no one man who was in charge. In the case of the consuls, there were two of them, and each of them had equal power, and each of them could veto the other one's legislation. Yes, the term veto came into use also. Each could stop the other if they didn't like, but the Romans said, we're not going to have another rule by one man. They found it loathsome. Now, if you jumped ahead in Roman history, you know that eventually they were ruled by one man because the Republic did not last. And the democracy, such as it was, did not last very long either. It lasted a few generations and then fell. Now, some people who studied the Roman Empire said that the problem they had was they never defined what power each of these offices held. Now, we have in our country a constitution. The constitution, I mean, I can quote it: the president shall have power. Congress shall have power. Then it enumerates the powers. It means the president has this power. Power to call Congress into special session. The Congress has the power to declare war, to regulate trade, to coin money and regulate the value thereof. I mean, all these powers were set forth initially by founding fathers. In the case of the Romans, they never defined what power each officer held. And an office would come into existence, remain in existence for a while, then it would become what you call ceremonial, where the person who held it had no authority. He would just act in one of the many ceremonies as a head, but in reality he was, you might say, he was nothing. And some people believe this led to the fall of the Roman Empire because it did not define their offices.